Welcome, Interim Police Commissioner for the City of Philadelphia, John Stanford. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
It's nice to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell me what your future is. Will you remain in the Philadelphia Police Department, do you think?
Oh, I'll remain in the Philadelphia Police Department. What role I play will be discussed with the incoming Commissioner, Kevin Bethel. But any role that I'm a part of in terms of in the department, still going to have the same mission of trying to move the department forward, working to help see the department, have success. And that's a part of seeing him be successful as a commissioner, seeing the mayor elect be successful in the position as mayor, but just continue to move things forward. Our mission is going to remain the same.
So you're going to carry out your career here. You expect to serve the rest of your career in law enforcement in the city of Philadelphia?
Well, I mean, I can't predict the entire future, but in terms of my immediate future, I don't have plans to go anywhere. I love this city. I love this department. And so as of right now, I have no plans to go somewhere else.
You'd be a deputy, I would imagine you'd be a deputy commissioner. And you've now run the department, you've had lots of positions. As a person who's run the department and maybe a deputy commissioner, what would you say back to Kevin Bethel, who's now going to run this department? What would you tell him about this department?
So Kevin Bethel and I worked together under the Ramsey administration
for a long time, right?
for quite some time. And so we have some very similar thoughts and views as to some of the things that we need to do as an organization. Quite naturally, we haven't been in this space together over the past 8 years, but in saying that, I'm going to give him every bit of knowledge that I have, that things that I've seen over the course of the past few years, both playing in this role as commissioner, as well as my role as first deputy. I'm going to, do everything in my power to make sure that we are successful as an organization. But the two of us have a really good relationship. We work together, have that understanding as to some of the things that need to be done.
There is a position of Chief Public Safety, a new position that will be in the department. Are you interested in that position? Do you know anything about whether you're in play for that or have any interest in that, or they're considering you for that?
No, I haven't heard anything in terms of regarding that. No.
You interested in that? I mean, would that be something you...
Is that the role you're referencing of the new elected
that's
position?
That new position.
Nah, we'll see how things play out, in the department.
When Bethel was announced, they said that there were 3 finalists. Were you one of the finalists? Do you know?
I don't know. That's something you would have to ask the incoming mayor in terms of who were her final 3. In order to get that answer.
You don't know if you were or not. They didn't call and say to you, hey, you're one of the 3, we're going to pick from a group of 3 here.
No.
You didn't hear that. Homicides in the city of Philadelphia, when we last checked, we're taping on the 13th of December. They're at 397, down 19%. Certainly 397 is a large number.
Right.
There is no question. But they're down 19%. To what do you credit that?
Well, at the beginning of the year, I mean, going back to actually September of 2022, Commissioner Outlaw at the time brought myself up along with 2 other deputies and we began to look at just some different things, what we need to do in terms of moving the department forward, preparing for 2023. With that being said, part of that was an analysis being conducted as to looking at our crime and what we were doing around the pinpoint strategy. We pretty much realigned all of the pinpoint grids, focusing on the violence, the data, right? Letting that drive us as to what we were going to look at. As a result of that, we identified 4 key districts that were driving 43% of the violent crime in the city. The 22nd district, 22nd, 24th, 25th, and 39th. 43% of the violent crime, homicides, and shootings were coming out of those 4 places. And if you look at a map of Philadelphia, they are all aligned essentially in a square, all connected to each other. So what we started to do was really focus on the hot spots in those areas, focusing on the prolific offenders in those areas. We redeployed additional personnel out of our administrative positions within the department on a rotation to be able to beef up the staffing levels in those core 4 areas. Again, realigned all of the pinpoint grids in all 21 districts. So just being able to also refocus where officers were being deployed in all of the districts across the city, and we started to see significant decreases.
Do you think that, have you seen this sort of a 19% decrease in those main district that you were looking at?
Absolutely.
Are you sure you've had that reaction in those districts?
We have, and also utilizing investigations to communicate very rapidly. So we have our shooting investigation group. They work alongside homicide, and so having the two of those units in terms of investigative units coordinating with each other, communicating, able to get information out to the officers. One of the biggest things that we've seen is the communication between investigations and patrol. And so as they are developing suspects, developing information, we are utilizing, that technology component of communicating with our officers, getting that information out quickly so we can kind of get in front of any type of retaliatory violence.
What do you say to those who would say what this also is, though, is that there was a lawlessness and a looseness that happened during the pandemic that simply floated on, and now, 2 or 3 years post-pandemic, there's simply a tightening? That we've moved to a little bit more normalcy, and that reflects in that 19%.
Yeah, so, listen, across the country in some cities, you're seeing a reduction in homicides, around 8% or so, a little bit of a reduction in shootings. We've doubled that.
So you think that, so you're doing better, think, than
we are doing better.
Other violent cities?
We are, and listen, that's a testament to the men and women in this organization, still being understaffed and knowing that they're out there doing the hard work each and every day. We've seen those significant drops, and going back to your question of seeing them in those 4 districts, we absolutely have, but we've also seen them in some of the other districts that we know drive crime in the city. We've seen those same reductions.
What cities would you say? What city do you think has only gotten A? Where are you? Who are you bettering?
So I don't know the cities off the top of my head in terms of all of their stats, but just generally speaking, major cities have been down around 8-9% at best. And again, we've seen that number hover between 19, 20, 21% in homicides, but also shooting victims. We're around 26% decrease in shooting victims. And so again, I think it's focusing on those areas. We're above those trends. Yeah, we were at some of the highest peaks in terms of homicides over the past 2 years in this city, but looking at refocusing and really getting into the areas that are seeing the most violent crime, working with other agencies, working with some of the intervention groups, really delving into who is committing the crime. I think we've been able to see some significant decreases.
But will Philadelphia always be stuck, though, in the neighborhood? Okay, you're down 19%. There are 400 murders as we close the year. Is the city always going to be stuck with hundreds of murders, even when the numbers seem to move positively?
Well, listen, I think our lowest, we got down in some years back, 247, I think was the lowest. And I think at that time you heard then Commissioner Ramsey say we had the possibility of going under 200. I think that there's a possibility to drive those numbers down and to keep driving them down. I think it depends on, again, obviously policing is one component, building up our staffing numbers and building up relationships with communities. But it's also, what does the city look like in some other areas, right? There's an economic poverty, yes,
education,
exactly,
flow of guns,
exactly. And so if all of those things are addressed as aggressively as crime is addressed, I think we will see some of those. We can see those numbers drop significantly and get to a space where we have continuous reductions in the city.
But some of those issues you've got no impact on. You can't touch poverty.
A lot of those issues we have no impact on, yes. Yeah, in terms of we have no direct impact, but all of those things come back to crime, right? And in the sense that, abandoned properties, poverty in many areas, it all ties back into crime. And it doesn't mean that people that are living in poverty are committing crime. It's very two different things, but they are closely connected in what we've seen in this city and just across the country.
Well, deprivation can lead to crime.
It can,
right?
It can.
And you want something, you're going to get it. Go get it.
It can, but I also want to be clear that everybody that lives in poverty does not commit crime, because that is not the case.
I see rapes at 513, robbery with a gun, 2,400, 2,466. Those numbers are down. I mean, they're still significant, but they're down. Stolen autos are up some 77%. And I know just from covering news in the city, a lot of that are young kids and young kids with guns. What has happened there?
So on the first part of that, you're right about the other violent crime. We're seeing some decreases in those areas as well. But with the stolen cars, we have seen an increase. If you go back to the beginning of the year, a big conversation around the TikTok challenges out there of stealing the vehicles. with Kia and Hyundai, and we've done some different initiatives with partnering with our police district advisory councils on giving out clubs and things like that to do that. We've been putting out literature to try to educate people on making sure their vehicles are locked. But with that being said, we also noticed that a lot of electric vehicles like scooters and bikes and things like that are also being tallied in that number. And so looking at that to know that number has increased as a result of that. But one also great point I want to point out is that despite seeing those numbers rise as well, we've also seen the recovery numbers rise as well. I mean, we're close to 19,000 vehicles that have also been recovered in the city. And so we see that a lot of those vehicles are being stolen for joyrides, to commit other crimes, things like that. But our officers are also going out there and recovering a great deal of them as well.
You do have kids with guns jacking people, right?
We do.
Taking cars, guns, sometimes they're shooting.
We do, but we've also seen some significant decreases in that with some work with some of our other law enforcement partners to see some drops around 35-40% in those carjackings as well.
So we've looked at these numbers here, and we know murders are down, some of the serious crimes are down, as we said, auto thefts are up, but generally we've got dropping numbers. Yet there is a perception from people who do not live in the city, and some who do, but who do not live in the city, they're not coming here, they don't believe the city is safe. Where does that come from, Chief?
Well, listen, I mean, you've had some years of rising numbers, right? And so the first year of those numbers dropping isn't going to make people just automatically feel safe at the blink of an eye, right? And so we have to continue to do some work, one, to let people know that these numbers are dropping, and that's a big piece of sitting down, having these conversations, to let people know that these numbers are starting to get a little bit better. But it's really big around people feeling safe, and that's a part of us being visible, being present out on the street. That was a big part of us redeploying folks back out into patrol so that citizens in the city could see police officers.
But sometimes it's the nature of the violence that draws people away. When a security guard, 27 years old, gets stabbed in the neck, by a guy who's routine, apparently stealing things, and decides to kill somebody, that's reverberated everywhere. We cover it, everybody covers it, and the perception is locked.
Yes, and the other part to that is that everybody has it at their fingertips. They have access to seeing, in terms of the crime, almost as it's happening between social media, between all of the different apps that exist. Everybody is right in the mix as it's happening. And so that's another thing that it constantly feels like you're hearing nothing but the alarms go off, so to speak, as it relates to crime. But we have to do a little bit more, even on our side, to show folks that we are, we're out there doing the job, that our officers are doing the work to drive the numbers down. And they're not just numbers. I mean, we talk about the homicides being down. They're connected to people. Yes. And so, when we talk about being down, statistically we're down. But the reality is that there's still almost 400 people murdered in this city. And they're attached to families. They're attached to people, to loved ones. And so that's the big component of getting into that space of making people feel safe and understand what we're doing.
You're down 880 cops.
Yes.
Why don't people want to be cops? Why don't men and women want to be cops?
So, I mean, listen, policing, this profession has been beat up over the past few years, and just bluntly speaking.
Unfairly beat up?
Well, I'm not going to say, unfairly across the board. There are some things in policing that need to be addressed, but I think in some cases unfairly. The same way that we say we don't want a particular race to be judged based off of a small percentage of people doing something. The same thing kind of plays with law enforcement. Many times the entire race of law enforcement, so to speak, is judged by a small percentage doing something that's inappropriate. Should those actions be condemned when they occur? Absolutely. But I also think there are a lot of men and women that are doing a hell of a job and doing it the right way. And that's not highlighted in the same way. And so I think during the time of civil unrest, during the time of COVID, it was police were the ones that were still working, right? And have no choice. You can't just take off. And so I think just seeing that type of, the response from so many people, even in this city, there were many districts that had really good relationships with a number of different communities and community groups. And, during the civil unrest, those relationships became frayed because of what they saw in other places, but not because of their relationship with the officers here. And
but are police in the country responsible in some way for failing to train more aggressively, for failing to move bad cops out of enforcement? The Floyd and Tawana Brawley cases have changed, unfortunately, the country's view of cops, I think. Seems to me those are almost the seminal events.
So if you
that
go back
have
before
redefined
that,
the view.
you go back to Mike Brown, right? In terms of going back to
the King case in L.A.
Yeah, well, if you go back, yes, and you can go back even before that. It's just a matter, I think, this being the first time that people were able to see this in such a way of you have a video recording. Folks are home to be able to see this, and you see someone ultimately die right in front of your face. And so your question is, do police hold some responsibility in correcting police behavior?
Yes.
Absolutely. I don't think you could talk to anybody in this profession.
But do you think that's happened fast enough? Do you think those reform measures have happened fast enough?
So again, I'll speak for this department. We have done many of the reforms going back to 2014, 2015. We started that reform process. We were ahead of the curve in many cases, much further along than many other departments. I think it was a thing in terms of many people in this city didn't know that we already had policies on the book regarding use of force. We already have certain use of force review process. We already had a relationship with, it's now CPOC, but at the time it was the PAC. And so it's all of those things that I think you have to make your citizens aware of that you're doing. But we had already been doing a lot of reform work here in the city with the Department of Justice, going back to when Commissioner Ramsey was here. He sat on the task force under President Obama. We had started all of that, and so I think it's one of those things where you look at, was the George Floyd incident a horrible incident? Absolutely. It was. The police reform that needed to come out of that? Absolutely. When you look at what this department in Philadelphia was doing, I think there are some situations and cases where we were not looked at in a unique space of saying some of these things we're already doing. And listen, where can we sit down and talk about the areas that we can get better? But honestly speaking, there are a lot of men and women in this organization that were doing it right in 2020 and that are doing it right now.
So why isn't that reflected then in the number of cops you need? You're still down 800 some odd cops.
Well, listen, I think policing, gets grouped together, gets all lumped together. And so this is not a profession that has been seen as a favorable one over the past, few years across the country. We're not the only department that is, struggling with that. And it's even not at the policing level. You see all law enforcement agencies that are struggling. Federal law enforcement agencies, they're struggling to hire, and that was never a thing for them. And so I think it's just law enforcement as a whole has seen this cloud over it. And again, are there some things that need to be changed and that needed to be changed? Absolutely. But I also think there were a lot of good things that were being done, and many of the conversations didn't take place that probably should have.
I have long wanted to ask a police officer in your position this question, and it's this: why aren't cops more vocal about gun laws, particularly gun laws in the state of Pennsylvania, that endanger you?
Well, listen, I think anytime you certainly have spoken to me, and I think any other, we speak out on the fact that we need gun laws that are going to be firm. We also need to use the laws that are already on the books, and that's a big piece of that in the sense that there are a lot of laws that are already written, and that we have to really get into a space where we're utilizing the laws that are already there to hold folks accountable for a lot of these gun charges. When you look at it right now, homicide victims in this city, and 40%, almost 40% of them have had some type of violation of Uniform Firearms Act arrest, and that are homicide victims. And so it's a cycle that's connected all together. One of the areas where we absolutely need to have some help.
40% of the victims of gun violence have had gun offenses in their past,
yes,
or some link to a gun crime.
Yes.
So that makes what point?
It makes the point that
one, getting shot are shooters.
Are shooters as well, or have been in possession of firearms, but also in the sense that, if you address a lot of the gun crime in terms of firearms possession, you may actually be reducing some of these homicides
So
as
your
well.
argument is that we are not aggressively locking up people with is
Not
that
so
your
much
argument?
it's not so much as we aren't locking them up.
We're
The
not
back
holding
end in
them?
terms of holding folks accountable all through the criminal justice
What do
system.
you mean by holding? I mean, how do you hold somebody accountable? You be gun crime, you prosecute them, you lock them up. Is
Well,
that not
in a sense,
happening?
so we have one component in that, right? It's as
arrest
police, our job is to arrest, but then there's another component as to how they are charged, and then there's another component as to whether or not they are convicted, and what penalty they are given. And that's the one thing we don't have any control over those last two components, and that's one where all partners in this criminal justice system, one, have to be held at task to do their part.
So your argument is we're not prosecuting folks guilty of gun crimes aggressively enough and holding them in the city of Philadelphia.
Again, I don't want to put a blanket statement to say we're not holding anybody accountable, but we've seen too many cases in this city where folks have previous gun possession, gun arrests, and you ask yourself in terms of what's being done with them. I'll use one perfect example. The individual the other night that shot two of our police officers,
Yes.
he had 3 prior VUFA convictions. Not just arrests, but convictions.
And was he paroled? Is that what happened?
He was
there?
on probation for the last incident of that, which ended in 2022. And so, for me, the question is, what happens with an individual that carries, that gets convicted for a violation of Uniform Firearms Act 3 different times, and then has the ability to get his hands on a gun, and to the point where he almost takes the life of two police officers, and so that's a.
It sounds like a direct criticism of the district attorney.
I don't know.
Is that what that is?
Well, listen, he's not the only component. The district attorney is not the only component of the criminal justice system.
So
you have the courts, right? And I think many times
judges, prosecutor,
yes,
they're not doing enough.
Right.
But when I ask you about gun laws, in Pennsylvania, a legal buyer can buy as many guns as they want in a single purchase. You know that, I know that. Isn't that a law that endangers your officers because it puts guns on the street?
Absolutely. I mean, there needs to be, some tighter legislation as to, how folks are able to get their hands on guns. And again, it's not talking about the legal gun owners. Many of the guns that we see are not from legal gun owners, right? But there needs to be something, to tighten up that process. Absolutely.
But do cops get involved in lobbying and pressing legislators on those issues? Because I think sometimes I wonder if you, with what you're wearing and how you show up, that might help.
Yeah. So I don't know in terms of saying, what individual officers do to support gun legislation. Because again, you have so many different views on that.
But as a department?
I think we have been very vocal in the fact that we need to have, strong gun laws. Again, not penalizing people that are law-abiding citizens, not penalizing people that are responsible gun owners, but there needs to be something done where we are not having folks carrying the amount of guns that we are recovering each and every year.
Is it dangerous for your officers to engage in what's been referred to as the legal form of stop and frisk? Is that not inherently dangerous?
Listen, it's dangerous for our officers in every encounter that they have. There's a level of danger there.
Is that effective? Is it an effective tool, do you think?
Well, it's something you have to do, and in the sense that you have to engage in pedestrian investigations. You have to engage in vehicle investigations. But there are many components of this profession that are dangerous, and those two are very dangerous components. Vehicle investigations can be one of the most dangerous encounters you can have. Domestic encounters can be dangerous. Right. So all of those things, anytime a police officer is engaging or encountering someone that is possibly looking to do harm to them, is a dangerous situation. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to predict in what situations that will occur.
But there is been much debate about the legal form of stop and frisk, and I know there are legal forms of stop and frisk. Do you think there's been too much talk about it, and there's too much thought that in and of itself can drive down crime?
Well, I don't know if it's too much talk about it. I think we have to talk about anything that we can think can be effective tools and giving our police officers the ability to do the job the right way. I think the key component to that is ensuring that any technique that's used in policing is done properly, and we have measures that are in place to review and vehicle investigations, to review pedestrian investigations, to ensure that they are in line with the law. But I think that's the key piece, is that as long as we are doing and exercising the practices in line with the law, I don't see any problem in us utilizing any tool that's going to allow us to be effective as police officers in this city.
Do you think former Officer Mark Dial is guilty of a murder one offense?
Listen, I am not going to weigh in on that. That is still an open litigation and open process. So I'm not.
27-year-old cop. He's sitting in jail right now on a murder one charge. There's no bail on murder one.
Yeah.
I mean, as a police commissioner, do you look at that and think that?
Well, listen,
is unfair or unjust?
He is not employed by this department anymore, and so it would be inappropriate for me to weigh in on that, considering that it is still, a criminal case and still a criminal matter. It would be inappropriate for me to weigh in on that.
I just have a few more. When that event happened, the police department inaccurately reported how that event happened.
Yes.
Do you know now? The department said, former Commissioner Outlaw said that they would find out who did that, who gave them that information. Do you now know how that bad information was spread?
And so I would have to check in terms of the internal investigation on that, but I believe at the time the information was relayed through a couple different individuals out on the ground, but I don't know in terms of, off the top of my head, the outcome of that particular investigation.
Obviously, that was disappointing, because that led, I think, to some of the unrest that happened, right? Because the first depiction was he's out of the car swinging. In point of fact, he wasn't. The video, he's in the car and he's shot.
Well, we didn't. The civil unrest didn't occur at that time.
No.
It occurred
But it was
with
part of the argument.
Well,
afterwards.
listen, I think there were some folks that were looking for an opportunity to just act out in that sense. And the reason I say that is because there were protests that were immediately following the announcement that was made by the courts. I was out there on the ground. Mm-hmm. I spoke with family members, and they were not calling for that. No. They were not calling for looting. They were not calling for destroying our city. They were calling for justice. And so to later see some individuals use that opportunity to then destroy, various communities in this city. No, I can't sit here and say that's what that family wanted, nor can I say that anyone that observed anything in that incident, in terms of the shooting incident, wanted to see our city be destroyed. And so I think you had some individuals that were looking for an opportunity, and they utilized that to capitalize off of that ruling, to then go out and destroy some of our stores. And that's why we took a very hard position, a very strong position, on ensuring that those individuals were arrested, and that, again, that they were going to be held accountable for destroying so many of the communities that work hard, so many of the stores that work hard to stay open for communities.
But did you understand some of the anger there?
I mean, listen, I can understand, the anger and emotion around the particular incident. I can understand anger and emotion that people may have around any type of incident of that nature. But what I cannot understand is why you make a decision to destroy businesses within your own community. And because, again, that has it doesn't fix the issue. It just makes things worse. And you talk about the economic status of this city, as we talked about before, early on in this conversation, having an impact. Well, that destroys neighborhoods that have worked so hard.
Businesses.
Absolutely.
I have a couple more.
Yep.
Does the Fraternal Order of Police simply have too much power in this city, and certainly too much power to put troubled cops back on the force?
Well, I don't know if it is, comes down to an amount of power. I will say, their job is to protect their members and to protect their employees. So they have a job to do. When it comes to individuals getting their jobs back, there's an arbitration process, and many times that is not looked at in terms of who are the folks that are on those panels, or who is in some cases the sole individual making that decision. on us having to take some individuals back in service with the police department. I don't think that falls solely on the union. I think that comes down to who is making that decision on that panel.
But does there advocacy sometimes for cops who've truly been involved in improper behavior? Does that endanger the public when it puts people back on the force, when they're so effective that it puts men back on the force and women back on the force who simply shouldn't be there?
Well, I don't know if I can go as far to say it endangers the public. I think it comes down to, they have an obligation to, essentially provide service and to speak up for the members that pay union dues, and so they have that obligation. To do that, and I think that they try to do that with the members, of the organization.
I know you have a child, correct?
That's correct.
Would you want your child to be a police officer?
So I have my own feelings about law enforcement in the sense of, whether it be family, friends, children becoming law enforcement. This is a dangerous job, and it has nothing to do with this department or policing as a whole. It's a dangerous job, and just thinking back to the point of, listen, I love the profession. I love what I've been able to get out of the profession, but because I know that the dangers that exist with it, I don't know how many parents are comfortable with their kids joining, law enforcement. So it has nothing to do with the status of law enforcement. I think it comes down to just, you can ask, parents, do they want their kids to be firefighters? If I know I'm putting my child in to telling them to run into a burning building, to sometimes save people or sometimes just to save property.
Sure.
I don't know how many parents are going to want their kids to do that.
It's interesting though, but you're the interim police commissioner. It sounds like the answer is no, that you would advise your child not to join the force based on the inherent danger.
I'm going to say this. I would support,
what they want to do.
Yes, I would support my children. I would support any child in this city that wants to become a police officer.
But the inherent danger seems to really give you pause when you think about your loved one.
Well, it does. I mean, listen, I think that's just normal, right? Like to have a pause of when you're talking about your own, flesh and blood, you're talking about.
But you are trying to recruit cops.
Well, we are, and so at the end of the day, but I'm a cop, right? And I say that I don't think, I don't think my parents wanted me to become a police officer. I think it's something that's in you, and I think the men and women that join this profession, they know it's a calling, and you've heard that before, and some will say it's like cliche-ish, but it really isn't. It really is a calling, right? And if you feel that calling, that you've been called to do this, you're going to come and do it. I compare it to something I heard, can't coin it as my own, but Deion Sanders, a few months ago spoke about his team and spoke about loving the game of football versus liking the game of football. I love this, and I think there are a number of people that get into this profession because they love it, and it's, you have a love for something that can't love you back. There are some people that join it because they like it, right? And so I would urge anyone, if you have a like for this, you have a love for it, to join it. But there is a space of, there are going to be folks that join this because they have that love for it. And that's the folks that we're trying to recruit, because ultimately I think that those are the folks that give their all to this each and every day.
Then that's all the questions I have that are a little darker, that have been a little more aggressive. Let me just ask you this. This is for some end-of-year programming that they're going to do here. So they're asking me to ask you what you see as the bright spots, some of the brighter spots in law enforcement, I think in 2023, and what you're hopeful for 2024. What would you be answer to that?
So the bright spots in 2023, and you touched on it already, the simple fact that we've been able to move in a positive direction of driving down some of the violent crime in the city. Again, that's not a victory dance or victory lap. There are still, 397 people that have been murdered in this city, still 1,600 people that have been shot in this city. So, still understanding that's connected to people. Those are real people. They're not just numbers. And so, but in saying all of that, giving some hope to our men and women that are doing the job, but also the members of this city, right, the citizens of this city, giving them some hope and understanding that we are moving in a positive direction. This may end up being one of the biggest years, if not the largest, 1 year decrease of raw numbers of homicide victims in this city, depending on how we finish out the year. And that's big. That's big in the sense that to know you're moving in a positive direction, to be able to see some of the advancement that we've made internally, seeing how our investigations are working very closely with patrol, getting information out as quickly as they are. We've seen homicide clearance rates increase to 59%, for homicide cases, 27% for shooting investigations. And so to